The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today entitled Small Cells and Backhaul Deployment. I'm Caroline Gabriel, the Research Director at Maravedis-Rethink. Our Principal Backhaul Analyst, Esteban Monturus, will host the webinar today and share some of our latest research findings from our leading backhaul service. We're also delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Andy Sutton, who is Principal Network Architect, Network Strategy at EE, the UK's largest mobile operator. Our subject is particularly topical because it is only a few weeks until the Small Cell World Summit, to be held in London on June 4th to 6th. Maravedis-Rethink is a lead analyst partner for this prestigious event this year, and we'd love to invite you to book meetings with us there to discuss some of today's subjects in greater detail. You'll see all the contact details at various points later on in the proceedings. To whet your appetite for our main presentation, a little on EE. EE was formed as a joint venture between France Telecom and Deutsche Telekom and is the first UK provider to roll out commercial LTE services. It's proving a trailblazer in refarming the increasingly popular 1.8 GHz GSM band for 4G and in its use of innovative small cell access and backhaul technologies. As such, Maravedis-Rethink regards EE as a trendsetter within the 4G operator community, as tracked in our flagship MOSA service, that's Mobile Operator Strategy Analysis, which examines the infrastructure rollouts of the top 100 4G carriers, and you'll hear more of that later. We know that Andy will have some very interesting technology and commercial insights to share. First, this is our agenda for today. Key findings from Esteban on the backhaul service, looking at trends and challenges in Metrocell backhaul, and some forecast highlights for Europe. Some highlights about the MOSA service from Adelaine Feller, and then of course the operator presentation from Andy, followed by Q&A. Before we start the webinar, just a couple of housekeeping items. This slide shows you how to use the webinar interface. The most important aspect here is that you can submit questions and review answers. So please feel free to submit questions in the box provided at any time, and we will try to address as many of those as we can at the end of the session. Some commonly asked questions. Can I obtain the slides? Yes, every attendee will receive an email after the event with a link to download a PDF version. And the event is also being recorded, so you will be sent the link to watch the recorded webcast or pass it to colleagues who may have missed today's event. For any more information about the research discussed today, our contact details will be shown at the end, and also please visit our website, seen here. Before we start the webinar, we would like to conduct a quick poll. That's the first of 3 polls that we'll do today. This is a simple one just so that we can get a feel for the demographics of today's audience. I'm going to pass to Esteban to make a few comments while Adelaine runs that poll.
Thanks, Caroline, and hello, everybody. I would like to take the opportunity to announce that Maravedis-Rethink is the lead analyst partner for the coming Small Cells World Summit to be held in London from the 4th to the 6th of June. And Adlan, Caroline, and myself, Esteban, will be attending this conference. Caroline will be speaking about bringing the intelligence to the network edge, and I will be chairing the first day of the backhaul track.
Thank you. We're about to close the poll here. There's still some people voting. I'll be sharing the results. So we have here a large representation from the vendor community who are very interested in what we have to say today, and followed by the carriers. We also good representation of the analysts, the media, and the system integrators. Okay, back to you.
Interesting to see. We'll have a couple more polls coming up, so thank you for your participation in those. I'm now going to set the scene very briefly for our subject matter today. These are a couple of slides highlighting some of the research findings from our various services here at Maravedis-Rethink, as MOSA, Backhaul and the RAN service. I'll leave you to Esteban to tell us a lot more about Backhaul. But of course, Andy and EE are very focused on small cells, which are proving to be an exceptionally important part of the new network of the carriers. So a couple of highlights to share here. One, small cells and HetNet really can change the economics of 4G. We're seeing in our surveys of the top 100 4G operators that the average carrier is targeting to halve the cost of delivering data by 2017, and in many cases, of course, they're looking for much more ambitious targets. To do this requires a complex mix of techniques, as we'll see in our guest presentation later. We can see from the graph how much those will change in terms of their importance to operators as time goes on. But a couple of important points. Of course, this will involve lower cost hardware, but also a greater reliance on the intelligence that makes sense of that hardware and allocates the network resources as flexibly as required. The other really important element is using a combination of spectrum bands, as no single band is going to have sufficient capacity, and that includes license-exempt spectrum and technologies such as Wi-Fi. Small cells particularly. In our most recent research for our RAN service, we believe that public access Metrocells, and we distinguish those from the private femtocells, will remain a fairly niche option until well into next year, but from then we'll see the prices and standardization starting to enable mass rollout, and shipments going up sharply to about almost 3.5 million by 2018 from a fairly small base. Other very important technologies in what we're calling the new RAN, the tight integration of antenna and radio at the cell site to make the cell site more compact and power efficient, and new MIMO and other active antenna technologies progress there to squeeze every piece of capacity out of the spectrum and air interfaces that we're working with before we start to think about perhaps the next generation and 5G. So I hope that's whetted your appetite, and before I hand over to Esteban for his presentation, we'd just like to run the second poll, and this one is looking more specifically at the backhaul topic for today.
Great. So, well, since this poll is regarding backhaul, I will be in charge of managing it. The question is, what will be the most common mounting and backhaul combination for Metrocells in Europe? First option, mounting on FTTX cabinets and boards and fiber backhaul, wall mounting and fiber backhaul, light pole mounting and fiber backhaul, wall mounting and a combination of wireless and fiber backhaul, and the last option, light pole mounting and a combination of wireless and fiber. So as you can see, there are plenty of options to backhaul Metrocells, and the results of this poll are going to set the stage very well for my slides.
Okay, so we have a few more people voting.
The trends depend, yeah?
Yeah, we have just a few more people voting, and so I'm going to close the poll here in a second.
Great.
I'm closing the poll now and sharing the results with you.
Okay. So this is interesting. So the preferred option, or the option that our attendees think that will be most common, is the use of light poles and a combination of fiber and wireless, followed by wall mounting. So this is just very in line with the results of our research, and of course this is particularly for Europe, because obviously the trends depend on the region. So let's start with the content for the trends in the Metrocell backhaul arena, and I will start by analyzing the trends in the Macrocell layer, Macrocell backhaul, to set the stage. First of all, as we all know, Europe is a region where microwave is the main technology for Macrocell backhaul, with about 60% of the sites being backhaul with this technology. Regulators in Europe are quickly opening the V-band and E-bands, and this is helping the millimeter wave technology to be adopted by cellular operators. There is a growing importance of fiber, and it is important to note that fiber is mostly deployed underground in Europe, which makes it really expensive. But in any case, there is an increasing interest from all the mobile operators in the fiber deployment, although it has been a traditional play of the incumbent operators. And also Europe has traditionally characterized by the use of network sharing agreements, being, for example, Sweden and UK, some of the countries where network sharing agreements have played for years. So before analyzing what are the trends in the Metrocell backhaul market, we are going to define what is a Metrocell according to Maravedis-Rethink. So for us, a Metrocell is an all-outdoor RAN device that is being used to provide hot urban coverage in hotspots and not spots. I'm talking about what is a Metrocell slide, Caroline. And these small cells, this concrete type of small cells are designed to be spaced between 50 and 300 meters apart. The typical height at which they are installed is between 3 and 8 meters. These kind of small cells do not have a closed group of users. They are open to all subscribers of each mobile operator. So what are the three main challenges for Metrocell deployment? I will start by fixing the place where Metrocells are deployed and then go through the other two challenges, which are power availability and backhaul. The first option for the location of Metrocells is the sites of buildings. The issue here is that there is a fragmented ownership because there are lots of real estate owners. Mobile operators need to negotiate with each of them to get access to the right place to locate the small cell. But in this case, power and backhaul is not an issue because Metrocells in this case can reuse the same kind of backhaul that residential femto cells are using. The second option is using street furniture. In this case, the negotiation to get access to the location points is somehow easier because the number of stakeholders with which the mobile operator has to negotiate is smaller. If you negotiate with the city hall or electricity companies, you can get access to all lampposts in the city just in one negotiation. Power is not an issue because it is naturally available in lampposts and in some bus shelters. And backhaul may be an issue, but if fiber is not present, then you can always use wireless backhaul technologies that we will analyze later. And the last option is to reuse FTTX infrastructure like bolts and cabinets. So for those converged fixed mobile operators, this is the best option. Power can be an issue in case it is depending on the flavor of FTTX technology that is being used because of the passive optical network technology. And of course, backhaul is not an issue because fiber is of course present in these places. So let's compare the different wireless technologies that are available for Metrocell backhaul. According to our research, then the main parameter to determine the pros and cons of each of the technologies in the wireless space for backhaul applications in Metrocells, it is the frequency band. So this is the parameter that we are going to use to classify the technologies. As you can see in the right part of the slide, we can see sub-6 GHz per link microwave, which is typically 6 to 42 GHz point-to-point links, local located microwave, which is typically point-to-multipoint, and millimeter wave, including 60 and 70 to 80 GHz, so B-band and E-band respectively. And if we go to the pentagon on the left-hand side of the slide, and we start by analyzing the bandwidth, of course, millimeter wave is the best technology because of the huge amount of spectrum available in the B and E bands. In terms of multipath performance, sub-6 GHz has been traditionally the main technology proposed by the vendors. But we are seeing an increasing interest in the industry to use microwave as well for multipath applications. In fact, the urban canyons provide a multipath environment, and we expect that all kinds of microwave, both point-to-point and point-to-multipoint, will have to support this kind of propagation. In terms of deployment speed, those frequencies that are block allocated, like sub-6 GHz and block allocated microwave, have an advantage in terms of speed, followed by unlicensed technologies. As far as regulation is concerned, of course, per-link microwave is the best technology because it is being deployed just the same way as in the Macrocell layer, so there are no challenges here. There are some challenges with the rest of technologies, particularly with the sub-6 GHz band, because the opening of the 3.8 to 4.2 GHz band is not well adopted worldwide, and also there is some proposals from the FCC in the US to use the 3.6 GHz band for shared spectrum applications. And lastly, in terms of equipment cost, in this case, the sub-6 GHz band is the most is the cheapest one because of the low frequency band, and of course the longer availability of spectrum. I mean of chipsets and equipment in this band, followed by point-to-point microwave because of simply because of volumes, and then point-to-multipoint and millimeter wave. But we expect this parameter to change because of the volumes, increasing volumes for millimeter wave and the synergies with WiGig. So what are the trends for Metrocell backhaul in Europe? First of all, there is a high social concern regarding antennas in this region, so there is a crucial need for unusual telecom form factors. We see that, or we forecast that those operators with fixed broadband deployments will try to leverage them at the most in order to save new backhaul deployments for Metrocells. And for those operators lacking fixed broadband infrastructure, small cells as a service is a very good alternative. It is also interesting to note that, of course, fiber will be the first option for chosen by mobile operators, but since we all know fiber is not available everywhere, so millimeter wave will be the first option chosen by operators, followed by point-to-multipoint microwave. This is all related to our latest backhaul report, wireless backhaul market from an intermodal perspective, just published this month. And in this slide, you can see our forecast in terms of backhaul breakdown for Metrocells in Europe, concretely. And you can see how for the first years in the 2013 to 2018, we foresee wireless technologies to be the main ones for Metrocell backhaul. And this will be decreasing as time passes by with an increasing importance of fiber. If you compare this trend in Europe with the rest of the world, you can see that wireline technologies will be much important for Metrocell backhaul in other regions, including APAC and North America particularly, which are very prone to use wireline technologies. So now I will turn to Atlan, and first we will go through a new poll, the third poll in our webinar.
Thank you, Esteban. I'm just going to take a few minutes before moving on to end this presentation to understand how familiar is the audience with our MOSA service, which stands for the Mobile Operator Strategy Analysis. If you could just take a few seconds here to answer the question, and I will close the poll, show the audience. So the majority here I've never heard of MOSA service, which is comes handy for me to present just a few slides about the service. Can you make me the presenter, please?
I have done, yes.
Okay, thank you. So just quickly, the MOSA service is a service.
Your slide, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. MOSA stands for Mobile Operator Strategy Analysis. It's a service that tracks the top 100 4G operators worldwide and analyzes in detail the wireless infrastructure strategies. Move to the next slide. And so in terms of coverage, what MOSA includes is a very detailed analysis of the different parts of the wireless network, including the RAN, the small cells and carrier Wi-Fi, backhaul. We also include information on the core network. And all this information coming from various sources, including interviews with operators, allows us to produce detailed operators profiles and also a SWOT analysis for those operators. And from the input coming from those operators, we generate a vendor ranking for the different players in the market. We also have detailed spectrum information on those operators. Structure of MOSA is pretty simple. We try to follow a drivers plus challenges equals or drive solutions, and we try to understand what are the different drivers and challenges that those mobile operators are facing, not only from a technological perspective, but also from a spectrum and business perspective. And so what we also do is have identified 10 key areas that we believe will have important impact on the 4G business case. Those areas are listed here. They are subject to change quarter by quarter, but what we try to do is map some of the leading operators that we identify are doing something superior in select areas and analyze them from this particular perspective. In terms of deliverables, we have 4 deliverables as part of the service, the first of which is the operator infrastructure detailed profile. We see, for example, here AT&T. We look at in detail the RAN analysis, which includes the different aspects of the RAN, the backhaul, the core, etc. And so we provide forecast by operator as well in very much detail. The second deliverable are quarterly reports, where we're going to analyze the trends among the top 100 mobile operators every quarter. And the quarterly reports are a blend of hard data as well as qualitative analysis. And those are provided in PowerPoint format, and they run about 100 slides, so they're easy to reuse for your internal presentations. The third deliverable is the quarterly master file, where we aggregate all of the information of all the operators in Excel format for better use. So you can see, for example, here the exact spectrum bands by operator. We have deployments, subscribers, cell sites, and CapEx, which is kind of the flow we follow. Now we have an extensive briefing and analysis support system to help you digest all of this market intelligence. In terms of the process, for building reliable hard data, we start with subscriber forecast based on operators' interviews. We produce an extensive matrix of cell sites, which are going to feed our RAN, small cells, and backhaul forecast in terms of units, and that in turn drives our estimation of CapEx and forecast. Just quickly, if you need information about, interested in knowing more about MOSA, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to provide you a live demo and samples. Quick word on the Small Cell Summit. We also be present there to assist you. Back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. We're now going to hand over to our guest speaker today. As I said earlier, we're very happy to welcome Andy Sutton, who's the Principal Network Architect at EE here in the UK. We'll just make you presenter, Andy, and yes, you've got your slides. Great to have you here, so take it away.
Okay, thank you, Caroline, and hello everybody. I've got quite a few slides in the pack today, so a few of them are really there for reference because you'll be able to download the PDF later. So a few will move through quite quickly and others we'll focus on in a little more detail as we go through the presentation. So I shan't read out the contents in the interest of time. What I'd like to do is start with an overview of our network as is today. It gives some context for the environment into which we'll deploy small cells. So today, EE operate a 2G, 3G, 4G network. We have a RAN share agreement on 3G. 2G and 4G are unilateral deployments. So effectively, we use a mix of Ethernet lease lines provided by fixed operators in the UK, typically BT and Virgin Media, and then we extend the connectivity from those lease line locations via point-to-point digital microwave radio, therefore finding an optimal balance of kind of cost and TCO for the backhaul network. So we have a single RAN platform for 2G and LTE, and a separate base station, which is a multi-operator RAN platform for 3G. That traffic connects back to a connectivity site, which is kind of towards the center at the bottom of the diagram there, where we have our BSCs, RNCs, as well as our security gateways to terminate the S1 traffic coming in from the LTE RAN. We also trunk X2 traffic back to those security gateways and then route back out for X2 interface, and then onwards through our core network out towards services. So today we're focusing on small cells though. So small cells would sit to the left of that diagram, and we see small cells as being an essential part of a HETNet strategy. And I think it's important to talk about HETNets because small cells are part of the answer, but there seems to be a lot of focus on small cells as being HETNets. HETNets, of course, will typically have a macro network as well, and it's important to maximize capacity in that macro network and then have a very clear strategy for how you deploy small cells underneath that macro network. So what we mean by small cells are effectively kind of outdoor pico cells, we typically call them, or Metrocells, as we heard in the previous presentation. So we're not talking about kind of femto or any kind of in-building Wi-Fi. We consider those separate. Typically, 250 milliwatts up to 5 watts in power. That could be deployed for coverage and or capacity. So in a lot of cases, they'll be deployed for capacity in dense urban areas. That's quite a common use case. But again, there's some use cases very applicable to kind of little knot spots and also rural coverage where small cells have a role to play. So HETNets are absolutely key to maintaining the customer experience in the longer term. They consist of multiple radio access technologies and multiple layers. So macrocells are the first building block, and we're going to supersize our macros effectively with multiple spectrum bands and multiple sectors, and then we add small cells below that, and we look at how we then manage that mobility and optimize that HETNet. And important to today's discussion as well is small cells we consider to have dedicated operator deployed backhaul. So again, differentiates them from a kind of femto type solution. In terms of capacity requirements, there's quite often a conversation as to whether we are deploying voice and or data here. I think the reality is, in most cases, small cells will support voice and data because it's very likely there'll be a level of unique coverage or capability delivered by a small cell. So we do need to consider that. In the 3G use case, we're really talking about some kind of low tens of megabits per second in terms of backhaul capacity. LTE, again, similar kind of considerations around voice and data, but the LTE case will depend upon the channel bandwidth and capability in the LTE small cell layer. 10 megahertz, 20 megahertz. Would you deploy carrier aggregation down in that small cell layer? And what about potentially using extended MIMO schemes as well beyond 2x2? So all of that will impact the capacity requirements for the LTE small cell. So certainly some high tens or possibly 100 megabits per second to those particular small cell locations. So in terms of quality of service and performance requirements. This is quite an important one because you don't want a subscriber to land on a small cell layer and know they're there. You want the service to be seamless. You want the user experience to be common across the network. So really you want that small cell layer to be transparent to the end user. So some key performance indicators come into play. Throughput is important. There'll be a minimum throughput threshold that you're aiming for a particular subscriber. Now, it may well be you can get higher throughput on the small cell layer. You certainly shouldn't get a lower throughput. Latency is an important consideration as well. When we talk about extending the backhaul solution potentially from the macrocell out, then clearly we're going to be adding additional latency. So we need to minimize that latency and make sure it's in the same kind of ballpark as the latency associated with the macro network. In terms of the availability of the small cell, this is actually a hugely interesting question. It needs to be available when required. So if it's deployed for capacity reasons, it needs to be available when the macrocell hits a particular capacity threshold trigger. Outside of that time, it doesn't need to be available. And it may well be with the evolution of small cells and kind of SON type technologies, we actually power down small cells in the fullness of time when they're not required, and then they're powered up when they are required. Synchronization, again, we need to deliver a frequency sync, of course, to the small cell location. But we also need to understand when we have to deliver phase synchronization. If we're talking about het nets, then chances are we're going to want to use EIC-IC, so we're going to want some kind of interference coordination, and therefore we're going to need to deliver phase as well as frequency synchronization out to the edge of the network to those small cell locations. So a whole bunch of course and performance requirements there on the backhaul. So if we look at some of the options applicable to EE, so these solutions will vary based upon your particular circumstance. Are you an incumbent operator, a competitive operator? Do you have access to your own fiber, or do you lease services, etc.? So EE are a competitive operator. We could, of course, deploy fixed or wireless backhaul solutions. We could lease or we could build either fixed or wireless solutions. And this is a very important point. If we lease something, then effectively we're taking a product from a third party as opposed to having access to the fundamental technology. So if we lease an Ethernet lease line, and that Ethernet lease line has a capacity of 100 megabits per second, then we would have to go back and lease a new product to increase capacity further. We couldn't simply remove the terminating equipment and put our own DWDM on the end of that fiber, for example. Whereas if we actually built the infrastructure and we deployed the fiber ourselves, then of course we'd have flexibility to change the terminating equipment. So it's quite interesting to understand those differences between leasing and building, which is basically the difference between having a product and having access to a native technology. And then within that environment, we could select copper, fiber, or wireless solutions. Copper would be some form of DSL, and we'll touch on some trials we've done on DSL for 3G backhaul. In fiber, some kind of PON technology, typically GPON nowadays. We have WDM PON coming along as well, or potentially point-to-point fiber. Maybe that's the ideal answer, to have a point-to-point fiber to every small cell, but probably not practical or affordable in the real world. And then, of course, we've got some wireless solutions as well, which are on the next slide. So let's take a look at that now. So in terms of wireless options, we have what are typically called kind of non-line of sight or non or near line of sight type solutions, and we have line of sight radio. So for now, let's focus on the NLOS systems. We're reviewing systems operating both at TDD and FDD. Typically sub-6 gigahertz spectrum. This is an interesting topic in its own right, because a lot of sub-6 gig spectrum, of course, is focused on radio access, so it tends to be quite expensive spectrum that's purchased to use for the radio interface between a base station and a user equipment. It doesn't tend to be in the right economic kind of bracket for backhaul. So what we really need to do is find a band that ideally is dedicated to backhaul. We have the right kind of price point associated with the spectrum, and we also have a kind of regional or ideally global ecosystem for equipment operating in that chosen band or those chosen bands below 6 gigahertz that are favored for backhaul. And of course, the question of licensed or unlicensed spectrum. Traditionally, as mobile operators, we tended to shy away from unlicensed spectrum in the main, wanting high availability and a very dependable service. There's lots of new unlicensed bands opening up now. We mentioned earlier 60 gigahertz of the V-band, so potentially that may be viable in the small cell space. It's something we're analysing, and I'll share some results of some testing with you very shortly. And again, what kind of architecture? Is it point-to-multipoint or mesh? So kind of multipoint-to-multipoint type architecture. And then if we look at the line of sight systems, we've got a similar discussion again around TDD or FDD. Now we're talking about greater than 6 gigahertz spectrum, and actually we've got a whole range of options here, from the traditional microwave bands, the new V-band and E-band. There's some research going on 90 gigahertz plus for the future as well, and then point-to-multipoint as well, which typically operate in that kind of 28, 32, 40, 42 gigahertz band as well. So some overlap there with the spectrum use in the traditional bands. And then again, licensed or unlicensed. A lot of that spectrum would be licensed, but I mentioned earlier 60 gigahertz. There are a few other blocks as well. And then the architecture, again, point-to-point now, or point-to-multipoint, and multipoint-to-multipoint. So there's a view of the kind of technologies. There's lots of different technologies, and we've selected some to trial, and we're now starting to look at trialing other technologies. But a very important consideration is the actual backhaul architecture itself and how that impacts your RAN architecture. If we think about backhaul in isolation, we may deliver an architecture that's not necessarily optimal in the longer term. So the backhaul could be fully integrated with a macro network, or it could be completely decoupled. So effectively we could connect in through chains of radios or fiber or copper connectivity to that macro network, or we could actually take the traffic straight out and deliver it back to the connectivity site without touching the macro. And that's quite an important consideration. So the next few slides just really touch on this integrated or decoupled architecture discussion. So here I'm showing fiber connectivity from 3 macros, and I'm showing the point-to-point connectivity back to those macros. So there we're fully integrated. The diagram below, I've excluded the macro backhaul there just for clarity, but we're taking all of the small cells to a separate fixed POP, and we're actually completely decoupled from the macro network itself. And of course, we could be using wireless solutions in that architecture, or we could end up with a hybrid of the two, where we have some connectivity to the macro, some to a small cell POP, and it's completely kind of opportunistic really in terms of which is the most cost-effective solution. But these are important considerations when we talk about the future and try and understand how mobile networks are going to evolve. Because increasingly in 3GPP we're talking about coordination between adjacent cells, between cells in different layers. So if we're going to coordinate, then there needs to be some central control point for that. Now that may be a central control point that requires low latency, or it may be, as some proposals now, for a more centralized processing capability that uses kind of more conventional backhaul where the latency is not too critical. So again, different considerations, but it's vital that you think about the architecture and how your small cell backhaul integrates with your RAN architecture evolution before you make decisions. So just some pros and cons there for the different solutions. Just to mention at the bottom there, 3G requirements most certainly can be met by VDSL2, fiber to the curb, as well as kind of GPON, fiber to the premise. The latency on VDSL2 is clearly higher than it would be on a line-of-sight wireless system or a kind of fiber system, and that's something to consider when you move to LTE. And of course, in terms of distance and reach, the number of pairs you need to bundle as well, that's quite an important consideration. But as well as that, when we talk about fixed connectivity, we should also talk about the type of CPE we have available and whether we can get the necessary support for quality of service differentiation and synchronization in that kind of low-cost CPE, which may well be externally mounted, given the way you voted earlier on the question about the type of structure and the combination of backhaul so kind of light poles and wall mounted with a combination. So we're probably looking at very small external installations. So we've done some radio trials. Let me dig into the details. We did some evaluation during 2011, so we're going back a little while now, and we selected a number of vendors to work with, one with a sub-6 gig product, one with V-band, and one with E-band. The first sub-6 gig product we tested was with a company called Blink Networks. Now, on the diagram on the left, if you kind of blank out the two parabolic antennas there, those are radios on the live network, and just look at the kind of box in the center and what looks like a cellular sector antenna. That's actually the hub site for the 3.5 gig Blink installation. So we did a lot of testing over in Canada initially, and then brought the equipment over to the UK. We deployed two links on a test and development license at 3.5 gigahertz. One running point-to-point as a reference, and the second running in a near line of sight mode initially, and then we're moving that at the moment into a non-line of sight mode. So what we found was, using the reference for measurements, the NLOS link was about 12 to 13 dB lower than the received level on the reference link, but we still achieved the highest modulation scheme there. We were only actually running a 10 megahertz channel. This product's got a roadmap to 20 and 40 megahertz channels. It's a TDD product. We run 256 QAM with 6A coding, and that included the NLOS deployment as well. We maintained that in that particular scenario. We were achieving 60 megabits per second throughput. We're running that 30 meg go, 30 meg return. We're changing that asymmetry at the moment, and as I say here, we're now doing some testing where we're doing some full non-line of sight, which requires some fairly interesting alignment on the antennas as well. The antenna alignment is not obvious at all if you're aligning off some kind of reflection, for example. We also tested 60 gigahertz V-band. Again, the product you're seeing here is a prototype. There's a slightly different look to the actual production equipment. We tested this with NEC in the UK. We deployed in license-free spectrum, so this was quite a new experience. I've been working with microwave for over 25 years, and I think this was the first unlicensed link I'd deployed. We ran the link over 324 meters. It was running 16 QAM in a 56 meg channel. The production product will run 64 QAM and beyond in a 50 megahertz channel. We actually achieved 183 megabits per second of symmetrical throughput. So again, quite significant capacity, and it was holding up much better than expected in the presence of rainfall. So that's kind of quite encouraging performance from that 60 gigahertz radio. And then the third solution we tested was an E-band radio from Bridgewave. Again, we did a lot of lab testing first, and this was interesting because we're running really high capacity here. It's a lightly licensed radio. We're running 1 gigabit per second across the radio, which is quite remarkable. And again, we deployed two radio links. One is a reference, which you'll see on the right-hand side. You also see the Blink reference link, the Blink sub-6 gig radio next to it. And then the one on the left-hand side, we're actually running along the side of a kind of metallic plant room, trying to simulate a kind of street canyon environment. And as you would expect, that link had a lower receive signal level. It's about 7 dB down from the reference. But nonetheless, it was stable. There was no interruption there. Once it was aligned, you have that next 7 dB. You can then compensate for that, and you can understand how the link's going to perform. So conclusions to date in this regard, point-to-point fiber is clearly perfect, but it's not going to be everywhere. Next generation access, VDSL2, certainly great for 3G. We tend to favor GPON and kind of FTTP type solutions for LTE, and we're going to be testing those this year. Near and non-line of sight radio systems certainly have a role to play. However, we do need alignment on spectrum bands, and we need to try and create a global ecosystem. 60 gigahertz works well. We've still got some issues to understand about antenna alignment and what happens when we get a bit of wind sway, but we think we have a fairly good handle on that. E-band is significantly higher capacity. It's a little bit more expensive than 60 gig at the moment, but there is some price disruption in the marketplace, and I think that's going to come down over time. So some next steps there, just to really touch on a few of these points. We're going to be testing some multi-point to multi-point radio systems next. There's a number of vendors out there who are developing systems at 28, 32, 40 gigahertz. So we're keen to explore and understand what we can do with these systems. The systems we didn't use too much in the macro network, but certainly they seem to offer some opportunity in the small cell space. And then, in the interest of time, I'll just touch on the bottom 3 bullets here now. It's important to model the architecture, as I said earlier, and then apply your network evolution scenario. So make sure you don't go down a dead end here. Make sure you understand how the RAN is going to evolve and how that RAN and that small cell layer are going to interact and what you need to do to enable that within a backhaul perspective. We need to work with strategic partners to fully develop the small cell ecosystem, and we need to work with the regulators to ensure access to suitable spectrum for small cell wireless backhaul. So to summarize, small cells are a vital part of an operator's solutions toolkit to address a number of optimization challenges, capacity and or coverage related. They must have a very low TCO. I mean, we're targeting 10% of a macro TCO within the same area, so clearly around the country that figure, absolute figure changes, but about 10% of a typical macro cost in a given area. And we need to see that ecosystem mature to achieve that. There's a huge market for small cell backhaul solutions, without a doubt, but we really do need to see some kind of best-of-breed solutions come together. You know, there's a lot of solutions out there at the moment. I think we're going to see some consolidation in that space, but we're going to need solutions for near line of sight, non-line of sight, and line of sight, as well as fixed solutions to hub off as well. So we're going to deploy both fixed and wireless. So I certainly agree with the majority of you before that said it would be a combination of wireless and fiber. But do consider your network evolution to LTE and LTE Advanced when you select that small cell backhaul architecture. So that really concludes my presentation. Quite quick given the time we have together today, but my email is on the slide there as well, and I'm most happy to take questions either now or via email later. So back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was a great presentation, and you certainly managed to pack a lot into limited time, so we do appreciate that. And
what a challenge.
Yes, we do appreciate that. But you have left us some time for questions, which is great. So hopefully we can follow up on a few of your points, and as you say, you have this email address if you're happy to follow through further.
Indeed.
So just starting off, there was one. I think your very final bullet point actually was rather intriguing and also reflects some of the questions that we've had from the audience, which is as you move towards implementing features of LTE Advanced, does that have implications for backhaul planning, especially obviously with small cells? I know you've mentioned carrier aggregation and moving to more advanced MIMO techniques, which I guess will be early features of LTE. How does that impact on what you're thinking in terms of backhaul?
It does indeed, and it's something that you do need to consider quite early on in the process. Depending upon the feature, depends on the particular demand. I mean, there are extreme cases where there's talk about ultra-low latency enhanced X2 to support things like coordinated multipoint. I think what's more likely in the first instance is the implementation of EICIC, which effectively allows us to make use of these kind of almost blank subframes to carry out optimization of the kind of coverage and capability of a small cell sitting under a macro cell. So in that environment, we don't have any particularly tight latency constraints on backhaul. I mean, we should always be trying to minimize latency anyway in backhaul, but we don't have particularly tight latency constraints, but we do need to deploy phase synchronization to the cell site. And it may well be that you could use a GPS, but actually in a lot of small cell locations, chances are GPS won't be appropriate, so you'll need some kind of line-fed phase synchronization signal. So that's quite a challenge, delivering that phase synchronization in addition to the frequency synchronization to ensure we can use EICIC. Features like comp, we start to talk about very low latency, but again, I think we need to see what kind of benefits we get from features like EICIC on a network, and then understand what additional benefits we get then from taking more latency out of the backhaul, but absolutely it needs to be considered as part of the evolution plan. I think the days of planning backhaul in isolation to RAN architecture have gone. It has to be a very coupled and integrated activity now.
Great, interesting. As Carrie's obviously starting to think about those issues. We've got a lot of questions. I'm trying to bunch some of them into general themes that several people are interested in. One of these is Fronthaul. What percentage of small cells you'd expect to be remote radio units and or cloud RAN type infrastructure and requiring Fronthaul, and whether EE has a strategy for that you can comment on.
Okay, it's certainly a subject that we're studying, and we're actively involved with the NGMN Alliance RAN evolution workstream, which includes backhaul and Fronthaul evolution. At the moment, we don't have any immediate plans for deploying solutions with Fronthaul. We think traditional backhaul allows us to meet our requirements at this stage. Again, that's part of the discussion really around kind of coordinated multipoints and understanding the kind of gains you get from that kind of centralized baseband capability. And there are alternatives being proposed as well, which put less demand on the backhaul network for achieving a level of coordination and a level of gain. So at the moment, we're assuming we would use traditional backhaul at this stage.
Great, interesting. We've actually got a question here directed to Esteban, if you're there, Esteban.
Sure.
Yes, great. Several people are asking what your opinion is of the unlicensed sub-6 gigahertz spectrum, which didn't feature so heavily in the forecast earlier, but what role you think that's going to play in the landscape going forward?
Right. So the unlicensed 5 gigahertz band is being successfully used in some developing countries for rural backhaul. But the issue here is that there is an increasing number of user devices that support 5 GHz Wi-Fi. And since we are talking about Metrocells that will be deployed in dense urban areas, the probability to meet user devices that can potentially interfere with this 5 GHz backhaul is relatively high. And given the number of Metrocells that will be deployed, we see, or we don't see mobile operators to take the risk of use an unlicensed technology that can be easily interfered, and then that would force them to come back to those places and fix that by changing the technology or changing configuration. So that's why we haven't considered 5 GHz as one of the candidate Metrocell backhaul technologies.
Great. Andy, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I agree in the main. Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more client-facing devices operating in that kind of band. There's a kind of sub-band, band C, which is lightly licensed and may potentially have some opportunity. But again, I think it's going to be a very noisy band in the future. So ideally, we would like licensed spectrum. There are many variables with non-line of sight backhaul. So I think it would be ideal if we had a unified licensed band that could be allocated, so we can achieve that kind of economy of scale and deploy carrier-grade solutions.
Sure, sure. Perhaps sort of tangentially related to that, but has EE been, are you interested or trialing any form of relay, LTE relay, or even WiMAX as an option in the future?
LTE relay is potentially an option. It's not something we've done an extensive amount of work on at the moment. We're busy rolling out the 1800 megahertz LTE macro network at the moment. But it's certainly something that we are aware of and we are studying.
Excellent. And obviously we've mainly been talking about backhaul today, but some attendees are still interested to know a little more about that 1.8 gigahertz band, your access band, and what the you've had a lot of profile in Europe for deploying in that at a fairly early stage, and wondering what have you found to be the benefits of the band and whether it has any disadvantages, particularly for the small cell side of the equation?
particularly on what side of the equation? Sorry, Caroline.
To small cells specifically, whether it's a good band from that point of view.
Okay, we certainly haven't deployed small cells in 1800 megahertz. So far, we've been deploying the macro network. So we initially started by reforming 10 megahertz, or 2 times 10, of course, FDD, from GSM to LTE. We're now rolling out 20 megahertz, so in the process of rolling out the kind of double speed capability on the LTE 1800 network. And what we found is that we did a lot of work very early on. We're very proactive in creating the LTE 1800 ecosystem. And a recent report from the GSA has just confirmed that actually 1800 megahertz is the most popular LTE band now globally. I think it's somewhere in the region of 44% of LTE deployments are at 1800 megahertz. So you know, we think it's a great band because it's a good balance between coverage and capacity. So if you look at what the two extremes of 800 and 2600, you know, it gives you a good kind of balance between the two. But of course, in the recent auction, we acquired both 800 and 2600 as well. Yeah. So we have a fairly powerful portfolio of spectrum now to help us to address all the different use cases.
Great. Also, sorry we're darting around on these questions, but we've got so many questions, so I'm really trying to cover a range of topics while we still have you online. I think we've got time for a couple more. Lots of questions about your approach to venues and large temporary events, whether sometimes obviously that's a neutral host environment, but whether EE has a particular strategy for that.
Okay. From experience, a lot of these venues tend to be quite bespoke. There's either a common neutral host infrastructure or you'll deploy unilaterally within there. So we gained a huge amount of experience during the recent Olympic Games. And thankfully, telecoms and data infrastructure throughout the UK held up extremely well during the Olympics. So yeah, I think we certainly learned how to handle large volumes of voice and data traffic in that environment. So we have made some fairly large deployments. Wembley Stadium is another one we've done quite recently. We do also maintain a mobile fleet. So in terms of special events where we may have a sudden peak in demand for a small period of time, an example would be Glastonbury, for example. We could deploy, and we do deploy, mobile capability to complement the existing coverage and capacity in those areas.
Hello?
Caroline?
Oh, sorry, we lost you briefly.
Okay, sorry. Did you get my answer then?
Sorry? Yes, we did. Yes, we only lost a few words. I think everyone was heard. Thank you. Don't know what happened there. But I think we have, since we do have you back, I think we have time for one last question, and then, well, we could go on all day, I know, but
fascinating
interest of everyone's time. Just a final one that I've seen quite a few people asking, which is about the full integration of the backhaul and the access units, sort of at the lamppost or wherever.
Yeah.
Do you believe that is going to be necessary? Is it something that's happening?
I think there are several stages to this, and again, it comes down to the ecosystem maturing. I think at the moment, you would want to deploy a best-of-breed small cell and a best-of-breed small cell backhaul solution.
Yeah.
So by default, I think they will be separate platforms at the moment. The next stage would be to do some kind of OSS, NMS type integration. So you'll be able to manage the two on the one site through a single interface. Then probably a mechanical integration. So maybe they sit in the same enclosure or they're behind the same cover, but they're actually separate devices. So I think we're quite a way away from having a completely integrated solution, because we need so much flexibility for different types of backhaul, be it NLOS, be it a fixed CPE, be it V-band, multi-point radio potentially.
Absolutely. Great.
I think we can't really
right. I agree with Andy. And
sorry, Esteban?
No, I was just saying that I agree with Andy. I fully agree with Andy, and I just wanted to add that since the challenges for wireless backhaul are not few, at this point it is very useful to have separate pieces of equipment, and then you can freely install the backhaul radio at the necessary height, because you know, line of sight is still an issue for microwave and millimeter wave. So as Andy said, we are still a bit far from integration of both pieces of equipment.
Sure. Yes, it certainly seems that way. And great to end on a note of agreement between our two speakers, which just leaves me to say thank you very much to both of you for talking today. And Andy, we really appreciate your time and your really interesting content today. That just leaves me to thank everyone else for coming and attending. The slides and recording will be available. You'll be sent a link to be able to download those. And our next webinar, as you see on the screen, is on June 18th with Yota from Russia, so we'd encourage you all to sign up for that too. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.